April 1, 1984, Los Angeles. Marvin Gaye was in his parents' house, and he had been there since the night before. Outside, it was a Monday morning, quiet street, the kind of day that doesn't announce itself. He would not see Tuesday. He would not see his 45th birthday, which was one day away. What happened inside that house on Gramercy Place, the full sequence of it, is more documented and more misunderstood than almost any death in the history of American music. To understand April 1, 1984, you have to understand the house itself and the man who owned it. Marvin Gay Sr. was a minister in the House of God, a denomination that observed certain Old Testament practices alongside Pentecostal tradition. He was strict in the way that people are strict when they have organized their entire inner life around a set of rules. And he was violent in the way that people are violent when they have never found another way to express what they cannot name. Marvin Gaye grew up under that authority. He was beaten regularly as a child, not in the way that the era permitted and people later quietly regretted, but in a way that the people who witnessed it described as excessive, sustained, and personal. His father beat him for things that were not offenses. His father beat him in ways that suggested something beyond correction, something that had more to do with what the father saw when he looked at his son than with anything the son had done. The people who knew the family in Washington, D.C., where Marvin grew up, did not describe a man who was strict. They described a man who had a relationship with his oldest son that none of them could fully account for. There was another dimension to the household that Marvin rarely addressed directly, and that his family kept private for years. Gay Sr., the minister, the disciplinarian, was known by those inside the home to wear women's clothing in private. What that meant to him, how he understood it, how it shaped the violence and the silence, he never explained. What it produced in the family was a particular kind of pressure, a secret held inside a household already under strain, adding weight to something that had nowhere to go. What Marvin made of all of it, how he carried the beatings and the secrets and the withholding, was something he returned to again and again in interviews, without ever resolving it in language. He described his father as someone he wanted to understand and could not. He described wanting his father's approval as the thing that had driven him his entire career. He described the household as a place where love was present but functioned like something out of reach. Visible, even named, but not transmissible. He never got it. Not once, by any account that has survived, did Marvin Gay Sr. tell his son that the music was good, that the career was real, that the man his son had become was worth something. Gordy said it. Smokey Robinson said it. Millions of strangers said it every time a record played. The one voice Marvin was listening for never spoke. The years between the childhood and the end were not a clean arc. Marvin Gaye became one of the most celebrated artists in American popular music, and then became someone who could not manage the simplest requirements of a functioning life, and then came back, and then fell again. A rhythm of ascent and collapse that repeated itself across 2 decades with enough variation to keep the people around him believing each time that the ascent was permanent. By 1981, the collapse had reached a point where he left the country entirely. He moved to Europe, first London, then Ostend, Belgium, carrying debt and a deteriorating state that the change of geography didn't fix. What Belgium gave him was distance, out of reach of Motown, out of reach of most of his creditors, out of reach of the specific constellation of pressures that had become unmanageable in Los Angeles. In that distance, he wrote Sexual Healing, The song was the clearest sign in years that Marvin Gaye was still capable of producing something the world wanted. It won him his first Grammy Awards. The Midnight Love album sold well. The tour that followed in 1983, the last tour of his life, was successful by every commercial measure, and people who attended it described a performer who seemed to be at the height of his physical and artistic presence. The stage version of Marvin Gaye in 1983 was stunning. That is agreed upon by everyone who saw it. What the people close to him during that tour described was something else entirely. The drug use was pronounced. The behavior between shows was erratic in ways that success had no mechanism to address. The gap between what appeared on stage and what existed backstage had widened into something no one around him knew how to close. In late 1983, Marvin Gaye moved back into his parents' house at 1 Gramercy Place in Los Angeles. The accounts of why vary enough that no single explanation holds. Some people close to him said he had no other options, that the combination of debt and personal dissolution had eliminated everything else. Others said Marvin was still trying, even then, to find something with his father that had never been there, that the man approaching 45 was still, in some essential way, the boy who wanted to be seen by the one person who had never looked at him directly. What is not disputed is how the house felt once he was in it. People who visited during this period described a household under extreme tension. Two men who could not share space without bringing out the worst in each other, surrounded by a family that had spent decades managing that dynamic and had run out of ways to absorb it. The night of March 31, 1984, something came through the surface. An argument between Marvin and his father escalated into a physical confrontation. Marvin Gaye, 44 years old, in the worst physical condition of his adult life, carrying everything he'd been carrying, attacked his father. By the accounts of people who were present or nearby, it was severe. Gay Sr. was injured. The house went quiet in the way that houses go quiet after something has happened that everyone knows is not finished. The morning of April 1, Gay Sr. entered Marvin's bedroom. He was carrying a .38 caliber pistol. The detail that is lodged in every account of this event, the one that resists every attempt to make it symbolic without also making it untrue, is this. Marvin Gaye had given that gun to his father as a Christmas gift. He was shot once. He was taken to California Hospital Medical Center. He did not survive. He was 44 years old. His 45th birthday was the following morning, April 2, 1984. Gay Sr. was arrested. The initial charge was first-degree murder. In the months that followed, a medical examination revealed that he had a brain tumor, a meningioma pressing on the frontal lobe, the region most associated with impulse control and judgment. The charge was reduced to voluntary manslaughter. He received a suspended sentence and probation. The tumor does not explain a lifetime of violence. It does not account for the beatings of a child in Washington, D.C., 30 years before April 1, 1984. What it does is complicate the story in ways that resist clean resolution, which may be the most honest thing that can be said about any story that involves this much harm accumulated across this much time. Gay Sr. lived another 14 years after his son's death. He died in 1998. He did not, by any documented account, speak at length about what had happened in that bedroom in a way that answered the questions the world carried about it. What remains is the music, and the question that every serious listener eventually asks: how did a man who lived this way manage to make things as beautiful as he made them? The answer, or the closest thing to it, is that the music was not made despite the father. It was not a correction of the damage or a monument built to prove the damage wrong. It was made from the same material as the damage: the need to be heard, the refusal to be silent, the conviction that something inside him was worth communicating, even when the one person he most wanted to communicate it to had never confirmed that this was true. What's going on? Let's get it on. I heard it through the grapevine. Mercy, mercy me. Sexual healing. 44 years produced a body of work that most artists would not produce in 2 lifetimes. Every record in that catalog came out of someone who was carrying, at all times, a wound that started in childhood and was never treated and never closed. April 1, 1984. Gramercy Place, Los Angeles. Quiet street, Monday morning. The kind of day that doesn't announce itself. Marvin Gaye was 44 years old and 1 day from his birthday, and he was in a house with his father, which is where the story began and where the story ended. Not because beginnings and endings are the same thing, but because in some lives they share a geography that cannot be fully explained and cannot be fully escaped. He had given his father the gun. No one has ever been certain why. The people who were asked about it in the years after tended to go quiet before they answered, as if the question reached past the available language and into something that required more than anyone had left to give it. Outside, the street was still quiet. It was still Monday. Whatever Tuesday was going to be, it was 1 day away, close enough to see, too far to reach.